Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. In remarks made by Douglas Macgregor, he highlighted the predominant concern among Americans centered on the southern border, contrasting it with potential lack of resonance in European circles. He pointed to the significant influx of approximately 10 million undocumented immigrants entering without proper scrutiny or security measures. Macgregor alleged a belief among many that these individuals are being strategically groomed as future voters for what he termed the unit party in Washington, suggesting a disconnect between this political conglomerate and the interests of the American populace. So one has to ponder how much longer this can persist. Much of that conjecture revolves around the economy. However, that's where the public's attention lies. That's the peril. There's scant vigilance regarding events in eastern Ukraine. It's not a priority, it never has been. The Middle East garners some attention, but as long as we maintain a non-interventionist stance, it's likely to remain peripheral. He asserts that the American government is detached from its citizens. The true wielders of power in Washington are not those who cast ballots in voting booths, a notion he views as somewhat farcical. Instead, he contends that Washington is governed by a political elite beholden to oligarchs, billionaires, and various interest groups such as the Israel lobby or the military-industrial complex. Ultimately, he suggests that a handful of billionaires effectively dictate the actions of Congress and the White House, rendering these institutions unresponsive to the needs and desires of the American people. Well, there's a possibility of him assuming the presidency, but it hinges on the assumption of sufficient electoral integrity to guarantee his inauguration if he emerges victorious. However, that's debatable. Increasingly, evidence has surfaced in recent years regarding the 2020 election. So, to be frank, the initial question is whether anyone can be elected amid such concerns over electoral integrity. It's not a straightforward matter. Secondly, presuming he does assume office, what implications does that hold for the broader government? Last time he was elected, every rally he attended, every address to the American people was met with fervent chants of "Build the Wall," signifying a call to secure the Southern. Once in office, the focus shifted from border security to addressing issues in Obamacare and introducing new healthcare legislation. The border situation saw minimal progress. This highlights the dilemma given his circle of advisors. Can we realistically expect a different outcome? I hope so, but I'm uncertain if the election will significantly alter the trajectory. The challenges we face have no easy solutions. None of the current candidates, with the potential exception of RFK Jr., have presented viable solutions. Donald Trump previously proposed conducting the largest deportation operation in history, a feat many deemed implausible. However, historical precedent demonstrates otherwise, with substantial deportations occurring under past administrations. The question remains, will he receive meaningful support from influential figures in Congress? It's worth noting that certain oligarchs who wield considerable influence in policy-making circles prioritize conflicts in the Middle East and eastern Ukraine over securing borders or the welfare of the American populace. Therefore, there's no straightforward resolution indeed. The judicial system in the United States comprises individuals appointed during various administrations since 1992. The majority of these appointments lean towards the left of the political spectrum. While there were some moderately centrist appointments during Trump's tenure, the overall trend leans towards the left. However, this tendency may vary depending on geographic location. For instance, the prospect of facing trial in New York City or Washington, D.C. raises concerns as there is a perception that one might be unjustly convicted regardless of guilt. This erosion of trust extends beyond the judicial system. Many long-standing American institutions now appear as mere facades lacking substantial integrity. Confidence in these institutions has plummeted to historic. In the lows regarding the military, there's a perception that its upper echelons have become increasingly politicized over the years. This politicization traces back to at least the Vietnam War era. Prior to Kennedy's presidency, it was rare to see high-ranking military officials appearing publicly with civilian leaders, let alone in uniform. The expectation was to engage as American citizens rather than representatives of the military establishment. However, this tradition faded in the 1960s, with officers often appointed to high positions to bolster the political agendas of city administrations. The practice of using military figures as political props became commonplace, seen as a career-enhancing move. This trend continues with figures like Milley and his predecessors, who are perceived as politically accommodating to those in power. So, that's a significant issue when you ask how I, as a former professional soldier, feel about it, I see Tucker Carlson as a champion of free speech, a lone voice amidst the current media landscape in the United States and the wider Western world. However, it's disconcerting to witness some German reports portraying him as a Putin agent, failing to acknowledge the numerous individuals within their own governments who are influenced by figures like Soros, much like they accuse Tucker of being influenced by anyone with financial backing. I'm transparent about my income sources and would gladly compare them with those of retired generals frequently featured in mainstream media, revealing the potential biases inherent in their messages. Therefore, I view Tucker's commentary as a commendable exercise in free speech. Regarding Putin's recent statements, I found myself in agreement with approximately 90% of his remarks, which were factual and accurate. However, his discussion of the outbreak of the Second World War was a regrettable misstep, tarnishing an otherwise commendable address. You're correct in your assessment. Putin's words were truthful. What's remarkable to me is his continued hope for a viable negotiating partner despite past disappointments, such as Boris Johnson's actions in 2022 that undermined previous agreements. It surprises me that Putin remains open to engaging with us in any capacity, given our history of repeatedly deceiving him and his predecessors. It's essential to recognize that Putin has long been viewed as relatively friendly toward the West, possessing a deeper understanding and appreciation of Western culture than many of his counterparts. However, the prospect of his eventual departure from power raises concerns, as some within his circle and others aspiring to his position harbor strong anti-Western sentiments, posing a significant threat. Ultimately, despite the substance of Putin's message, its impact is limited by the media's allegiance to his opponents and those who perpetuate policies detrimental to our interests, such as maintaining open borders and incentivizing mass migration. This situation is unsustainable and will likely culminate in a crisis, particularly when exacerbated by economic downturns, which we're ill-prepared to handle. Well, as they say, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and even someone like Putin can occasionally speak the truth. I believe he's being genuine in his recent statements, considering his health struggles and the extensive surgeries he's undergone. It's not far-fetched to accept his words. I'm aware that there were discussions about potential dealings with the West and the United States, so his claims aren't entirely surprising. It's apparent, especially with his wife's attendance at the Munich Security Conference, that Putin was perceived as a figure akin to Ukraine's Zelensky, someone who might lead Russia towards closer ties with the West. While I can't confirm this from first-hand knowledge, reliable sources suggest that both MI6 and the CIA entertain such notions. However, the narrative propagated by Western media remains largely unaffected by these insights. Unlike some other regions, we still have access to alternative media sources, though there's a concerted effort to suppress them. This notion of complicity, where dissent from the mainstream narrative is portrayed as dangerous, only serves to validate Putin's remarks. In my view, Tucker Carlson's interview was a success in conveying a certain truth. Its impact might have been greater here than in Europe, where the reception could... He perceives the Zelensky administration as unraveling, evident in the growing internal strife characterized by mutual accusations and infighting among key figures. The military forces, which have been gradually weakening for months, are now rapidly disintegrating. There's widespread reluctance within Ukraine to commit more troops to action, with significant resistance to further military engagements. While the secret police, the SBU, resorts to arrests and violence, it fails to quell the mounting unrest. Interestingly, recent accounts from Ukraine suggest that the population fears the Zelensky regime and the SBU more than they fear the Russians. Many are eager for an end to the turmoil, a sentiment rarely highlighted in mainstream media narratives. Zinni appears preoccupied with striking deals, including selling off parts of Ukraine to various corporate entities such as agricultural conglomerates and BlackRock. He doubts the regime's sustainability, noting Russia's remarkable patience despite provocations. However, there's a belief that Putin may soon be compelled to act decisively. Plans are allegedly underway to reclaim strategic territories like Odessa and Kharkiv, with significant troop movements already in progress. The pressing question remains, how does one address the issue of the cancer in Kiev? While it would be preferable for Ukrainian forces to resolve internal conflicts, this hasn't materialized. Consequently, there's speculation that Russia may mobilize additional troops as a deterrent and, if necessary, to secure its objectives. The recent reports of tactical nuclear weapons being repositioned within Russia are seen as a signal of resolve rather than a direct threat, serving as a warning against any aggression directed towards Russia. He emphasizes that victory is improbable given the weak position Ukraine currently finds itself in. The dismissal of Macron's proposal to deploy European or NATO forces into Ukraine by Chancellor Scholz and others underscores this reality. With recent cuts reducing the Ukrainian army's size and casualties surpassing 500,000, the toll on Ukrainian lives is undeniable. Despite these grim facts, there's a lack of significant international outcry, highlighting a glaring absence of humanitarian concern. A competent military leader, he comprehends both the strengths and limitations of their forces. Putin, from the outset, sought a limited conflict but found initial resources inadequate. However, subsequent adjustments have bolstered the Russian military, fostering higher morale, discipline, equipment quality, and leadership compared to previous decades. This enhancement has defied expectations and garnered substantial support from the Russian populace, with an estimated 85% backing Putin's actions. He notes a resemblance between Putin's strategy and that of Field Marshal Montgomery, who revitalized the British Army during World War II. Montgomery recognized the need for morale, training, leadership, and equipment upgrades. Taking his time, he built a formidable force that ultimately proved successful. Similarly, Putin and his generals meticulously developed a potent force without overextending themselves. They capitalize on advancements in military technology, exploiting the interplay between space-based surveillance, intelligence, and various strike systems to devastating effect. The Ukrainians, in their repeated attacks, played into Russia's hands, often targeting seemingly impregnable defensive positions. Despite this, many Western figures like Petraeus failed to grasp the sophistication of the Russian military strategy, offering flawed advice rooted in outdated perceptions. However, retired generals and politicians who advocated for such strategies continued to benefit financially despite their failures. This underscores the unfortunate reality that truth often takes a backseat to narrative perpetuated by those with the means to disseminate and reinforce it repeatedly. Moreover, the lack of sustained interest in Eastern Europe among most Americans further complicates the situation. When challenging the viewpoints of retired generals, one often encounters incredulous stares from others who assume their authority as military figures should be unquestioned, a sentiment lamentably echoed in Great Britain as well. As for the broader European perspective, I can't offer a definitive answer. My understanding primarily revolves around American interests and focus. However, it seems that in Scandinavian and Germanic countries like Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands, there remains a tendency to follow governmental and media directives without much dissent, which is disheartening. Looking ahead, there are two potential scenarios exist. One possibility is that after upcoming elections, there could be a shift in policy direction, leading to a decision by the U.S. to withdraw from the conflict. However, I doubt there will be any public admission of fault or acknowledgement of the damage caused. It's likely to fade from public discourse, akin to Vietnam. The forces simply pack up and depart. As I've been trying to convey to Europe, we possess significant air and naval capabilities, but our tendency is to withdraw when faced with adversity. This straightforward reality leads to a scenario where Europeans may observe our departure and consider following suit. Consequently, NATO's survival seems increasingly doubtful in the face of ongoing crisis. Alternatively, there's a disheartening possibility akin to the ending of the film Downfall, where Hitler's character bids farewell while bystanders remain oblivious to the impending danger. Similarly, many Germans were initially in denial about the Soviet forces nearing Berlin. Our media, both here and in Europe, has played a significant role in misleading the public, although there are alternative sources available, albeit with limited interest from the populace. What this really suggests is a familiar pattern where intelligence reports are selectively leaked, as a precursor to a decision to wind down operations. We've seen this before, notably in Afghanistan and currently in the Middle East. Similar dynamics played out during the Vietnam War, where the truth only emerged towards the conflict's end. It's likely that outlets such as the New York Times weighed the decision to publish against the inevitability of the information becoming public anyway, aiming perhaps to assert their commitment to truth-telling. Regarding Putin, there's merit in your observations. His historical perspective acknowledges the long-standing economic ties between Germany and Russia, seeing past conflicts as aberration rather than norm. He envisions a future where these economic interdependencies are revitalized despite China's growing importance. It's unwise to overstate any tension between Russia and China. Their economies complement each other, with Russia possessing the resources China needs. Moreover, both countries share a common outlook on potential adversaries, particularly regarding the United States. As Western interest in Asia wanes, any perceived threat from China diminishes, aligning with Russian and Chinese strategic perspectives. Where Japan emerges as a significant factor, Japan stands as a formidable scientific and industrial power with a robust military capable of repelling any threat. While they aren't seeking conflict, for nations like Russia and China, Japan remains a significant concern, especially if they perceive a potential vacuum left by the United States in the region. The cooperation between Russia and China outweighs any internal struggles, minimizing the significance of potential tensions between them. As for the broader context, much of what you've outlined holds true. It's not a recent phenomenon in Russian history. Ideally, there's a hope that someone in Berlin will recognize the current geopolitical realities. Take, for instance, the history of U.S. interference in Europe's energy relationships with Russia, a legacy of the Cold War that no longer holds relevance today. The Russians, looking westward, may find little appeal in managing the turmoil evident in many Western countries. The notion of Russian aggression towards the West is baseless and should be dispelled. The disparity in leadership quality between the West and other global powers like India, China, and Russia is stark. While leaders in those nations are seasoned and strategic, the West often seems amateurish in comparison. We're witnessing the decline of an era in Western leadership, characterized by a lack of depth and vision. The emotional appeal often triumphs over reason, which is a concerning trend in Republican governance. Interestingly, countries like China aren't necessarily interested in confrontation with the West, but are instead focused on strengthening their financial independence and global influence. The West's declining living standards and industrial decline are evident, yet the emergence of new leadership capable of addressing these challenges remains uncertain. However, it's crucial that any forthcoming leadership doesn't echo the tumultuous era following the French Revolution in 1789.